I found out last night that Jeff Beck died at the age of 78. And I called Ben this morning and we had a synchronized thought that we should make a video dedicated to him, his contribution to the music that we love, and also just use the opportunity to talk a little bit about how he approached music and the guitars that he used, and just a little bit of a celebration of Jeff Beck, the six-string warrior, as he was known. I've surrounded myself with Strats. He was a notorious Strat player, but he also played basically every other guitar under the sun. Obviously, he started off on the Yardbirds. He actually replaced Eric Clapton, which is pretty extraordinary. I think he was only with them for 2 years, and then he formed the Jeff Beck group with Rod Stewart. But I mean, he just had like a prolific career. I'm going to have to read here because there's so much to cover. But so he received Grammy Award for the Best Rock Instrumental Performances 6 times, which is just ridiculous. Best Pop Instrumental Performance once. He received the Ivor Novello Award for Outstanding Contribution to Music. And the best thing is he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, not just once, but twice. He played with like everyone. I mean, he played with like everyone. He played with David Bowie, Stevie Wonder, Rod Stewart, Jimmy Page, Roger Waters, Keith Moon, John Paul Jones, Nile Rodgers, Let's Get Bassy, Stanley Clarke, Flea. And then later on, he played with like Imogen Heap, Joss Stone, which I've got a funny story about, and Johnny Depp, of course, his mega band right at the end. He even played on a soundtrack to this movie Days of Thunder with Tom Cruise, where he collaborated with Hans Zimmer, the legendary Hans Zimmer. So I mean, yeah, Jeff Beck was one of the first people to really start experimenting with feedback. By his own account, they were doing a show in the kind of like mid-60s, and it's, I think, in Staines Town Hall. And basically, like back then, they were playing through like rubbish PAs. You know, we all know the stories of the Beatles, you know, where the fans were screaming so loud they couldn't even hear themselves play. The PAs were rubbish, so he cranked his amp and it fed back, and he noticed that he could actually utilize this feedback. He could control it. And so he started to use it like an instrument. And apparently after this Yardbirds gig in Staines Town Hall, this dude came up to him and was like, "Oh mate, yeah, you know that noise that like wasn't supposed to be there? You should keep that in." And he said, "It was deliberate, mate. Go away." That I was quite surprised to find out is that Jeff Beck built some guitars. He built, I guess, in a kind of Brian May kind of way. He wasn't a luthier, but he was definitely a tinkerer. You know, he tinkered around with a lot of his guitars, and as we'll talk about, there were some innovations that he came up with kind of through Fender with his series that was released. But anyway, he did build a guitar. He built a guitar in 1956. He said that he went to his neighbor, and his neighbor was like, "I'll build you a guitar for £5. And he was like, "Beep off." That's like 500 quid in, you know, in their money. And he was like, "I'll do it myself." So he did. He built himself a guitar. And he was always interested in the way they worked and how they were put together. He swapped out necks, and swapped out bodies, swapped out pickups, swapped out bridges, as we'll talk about. So yeah, the man himself was not so different from you and I in that one very specific way. Different in just about every other way, I reckon. Okay, so Jeff Beck had his own signature series, which started in 1991 one, and they were kind of Strat-plusy. But the thing was about the Strat-plus is that was kind of, in part, started by Jeff Beck inadvertently. He ordered a Fender custom shop build in '87. He wanted it to be this like bright garish yellow, because he'd seen this film American Graffiti, and there's this this Ford 32 Coupe which is like yellow, and so that's what he wanted. But then he subsequently pulled out of this deal, and Fender released this Strat anyway, but they couldn't call it a Jeff Beck series. They had to call it something else, so they called it a Strat-plus. But anyway, eventually Beck did have a signature model made, and this is actually mine, but it looked very much like this. The only difference being is that it had a rosewood fretboard. Well, the only difference, there's some pretty big differences actually. This is the color, this is a green Strat, but it had a few key features that were pretty iconic and quite innovative actually for a Fender. He also had like a different carve on the neck. He had this like 50s U-shape carve on the neck. He also had these gold lace sensor pickups, which are totally noiseless. I think he also had something, he had what was it, a TBX tone circuit as well. The big thing that he had was he had an LSR roller nut. He did a lot of bending, and one of the reasons he went over to the Strat was because he loved the trem system. And so he had a roller bridge on there, which really helped with tuning issues. A real innovation from him. His contribution to the Strat was pretty damn big, I'd say. It was the green Strat that he had that had it actually had Little Richard's name engraved on it, but it got smashed in half in a gig, like the body in half, wrong glue, and he had it glued back together, but then he never took it out anymore because he wanted to keep it as like a memento. So that didn't get played after that, but it was playable. You know, that's the cool thing about Strats. They are so robust, and I can do this because it's mine. So the next Strat I want to talk about was potentially the Strat that really convinced Jeff Beck that Strats were the way forward for him for the time being, because he did subsequently change over. He used quite a lot of Jacksons in the 80s. But anyway, Beck was touring with John McLaughlin in the mid-70s, and John kept on bringing him guitars like every show. He'd be like, try this, and he got really sick of it. In the end, he was like, mate, leave it out. I don't want to try any more guitars. I'm bored of it. He said, just try this one more. He gave it a go, and he was like, ooh, actually, I really like this one. He used Strats more than any other guitar after that. The reason that resonated with me was because it's always so important to keep an open mind with the guitars that you play. And just because something is this and that or the other, it doesn't mean that you're going to love it, or it doesn't mean you're going to hate it. You just got to pick these things up. You've just got to keep on trying them. They're all just a tiny bit different. He played tons of Strats, you know, he played Strats before that, but this one, he just really liked this one. And I love that. I love getting rid of the technicality and just being like, I just like it. I just do. Yeah. So the last guitar we're going to talk about, which I cannot do him justice. We don't have time. He's got so many guitars. He played so many guitars. But I did pick one more because it gives us a chance to just talk about that weird interim period between the Broadcaster and the Telecaster, and that is the Nocaster. Now, Jeff Beck owned one of these. When the Telecaster first came out, it was called an Esquire. They then rebranded it as the Broadcaster. And Gretsch came along and said, oi, we've just made a drum kit called the Broadcaster. So they got into this whole legal battle. And in the end, Fender were like, all right, whatever, look, we need to keep releasing this guitar during this legal battle. And we haven't come up with another name for it. So we're just gonna scrap the name and it's just gonna be Fender nothing. So it got kind of nicknamed the Nocaster. It wasn't long after that that they came up with the name Telecaster, and Nocasters were no more. But they're really sought after instruments. I would really like to own one day. Slightly gutting story that Jeff Beck seemed to be slightly sad about was that he had one of these, but he swapped it. He was sitting around with none other than Seymour Duncan, of Seymour Duncan, you know, pickups. And Seymour said, dude, I've got this telly and I've swapped the pickups out for humbuckers, and I know you love Les Pauls. Do you want to have a go? So we had a go, and he was like, oh yeah, love that. That's great. And he said, you can have it if you want. I'll swap it for that. And he went, yeah, okay. Seymour Duncan left the room, and he's just suddenly realized, he was like, oh, that was like the guitar that I played all the Yardbird stuff with. That was just a total legendary guitar walking out the door in front of his eyes. And the impression I get is he always regretted it slightly, especially seeing as Seymour Duncan, he's not a gigging musician. So this guitar literally sat in a vault, locked up, never to be played again. We all have regrets, even if we have amazing lives. I also thought we could just do a quick run through of his guitar list. I found a list of all his guitars here. So just to kind of give you an idea, this is through the years, so you can kind of see how he progressed. From the 60s, we've got a Polar White Telly, 1958. Then we've got a Graffiti Yellow Telly from 1954, which he played up to 1970. A Strat, 1954. He had a 1954 Natural Strat. I mean, oh man, I'm so jealous. What else did he have? He had Oxblood Les Paul, the Telly Gibb, which was I think was the one that Seymour Duncan gave him. Telly Gibb referring to the Telecaster with the humbucking pickups in. He played a Gretsch Duojet. We've been talking quite a lot about Gretches lately. He played Gretsch Rancher, and then he got this amazing Jackson in the 80s. He called it Tina. It was pink. So he played a couple of Jacksons in the 80s. He seemed to go back to Gibson towards the end of his career. A 58 Les Paul Custom Shop, ES 175. He owned a lot of guitars, man. But the overriding kind of iconic image will always be of Jeff Beck playing a Strat, and normally a white Strat. And that's the last thing to say is, weirdly, so weirdly, I had a go on his white Strat, and I'm not sure which one it was because I can't remember, because honestly, I was a bit drunk. A Joss Stone gig in Exeter of all places, and I knew her and was backstage, and she said, oh, this is my friend Jeff. And I said, hi, Jeff. I was like, Jeff Beck, okay. And he was like, hey, man. And I was like, can I have a go on your guitar? What an idiot. And he said, yes. So I sat and had a little tinker on his guitar, and then I kind of, bounced off somewhere else. The gravity of that has never really hit me until today, when I've just been thinking about Jeff all day and realizing that what an absolute hero and innovator and legend he was. Even if you didn't listen to his music, you absorbed something of his influence via all the other guitarists that you've ever listened to, because they absorbed it from him. He was one of those, cornerstones, keystones, like foundational guitarists. So yeah, I just want to say, rest in peace, Jeff Beck. thank you for all you contributed. And thanks to you for watching. Like, subscribe, leave some comments. We'd love to hear your Jeff Beck stories and thoughts and feedback and all of that. So let's make this a positive and celebratory comments section. Nice one. See you later.